It was an ordinary morning at Willow Diner, the kind of place where time moved a little slower, and the smell of bacon and fresh coffee wrapped around you like an old memory. Sunlight streamed through the glass windows, catching the dust in the air, painting soft gold over the tables where regulars laughed, read the paper, and shared their quiet routines. Then the door opened. An elderly black man stepped in. He was neatly dressed, his gray suit pressed, a walking cane resting in his hand. His smile was gentle, polite. But as he walked toward a corner booth, something in the room changed. The voices softened, the laughter faded, and though no one said a word, the silence began to speak. The waitress, Lily, was all smiles a moment ago, but when her eyes met his, something cold flickered behind them. She turned away, pretending not to see. Minutes passed, then 10, then 20. The man waited, quiet, patient, dignified, while others pretended nothing was wrong. No one knew that within minutes. A truth would walk through that same door, a truth that would turn the quiet diner upside down and remind everyone what respect truly means. Before we begin this powerful story of silence, justice, and redemption, please like, share, and subscribe to our channel so you don't miss the stories that remind us sometimes. The quietest moments speak the loudest. Mornings at Willow Diner begin like any other. The first rays of sunlight stream through the large windows, reflecting off the weathered steel tables. Steam rises from the coffee maker, mingling with the scents of bacon, melted butter, and toast. A new day dawns peaceful, familiar. At a table near the window, a silver-haired man was reading the Daily Herald. He nodded at the weather report, sipping his black coffee without sugar. At the next table, an elderly couple shared a plate of fried eggs, talking softly. A young woman in a red coat was on her phone, listening to music, not paying attention to the world around her. Willow Diner's the kind of place you stop by every morning out of habit, not curiosity. Everyone here knows everyone else, or at least thinks they do. At the counter, Lily Carson, a blonde with braided hair, was smiling as she poured coffee for a regular customer. She spoke in a clear voice, with the confidence of someone accustomed to being in the center of attention. "Good morning, Mr. Jenkins." "Same as usual." The customer smiled. "You read my mind." "Lily." Laughter spread like sunlight on the tile floor. I still remember the smell of that morning, the smell of coffee, the smell of baked goods, and a strange feeling that no one else had noticed at the time. A feeling as if the atmosphere was waiting for something to happen. In the corner of the room, an old clock ticked steadily. The second hand slid past each small mark, unnoticed, but it was counting down to the moment when everything would change. A young waiter, Evan Brooks, about 19, a few weeks into his apprenticeship, stood huddled in the corner of the counter. He watched Lily with admiration, her quick movements, her easy voice, her impeccable smile. To him, Lily was the epitome of someone who belonged here. Outside, the sun was just rising over the roof opposite, reflecting off the silver-painted sign that read Willow Diner since 1956. The bell above the door jingled gently as someone entered or left. That familiar sound rang again this morning, at a different pace, slower, clearer. An old man appeared in the doorway. He wore a light gray suit, his white shirt collar buttoned up. In one hand he held an ebony cane, in the other an old felt hat. His face was calm, his eyes kind and bright. Harold Green, 82, walked into the bar like a man accustomed to the slow pace of the world. The door closed, and For a few seconds, Willow Diner was quieter than usual. No one spoke, but something small shifted. A knife and fork clanged softly, then died away. Harold looked for an empty seat, choosing a table near the window where the sunlight first touched. He sat down, gently placing his hat beside him. A smile crossed his lips, gentle as a distant memory. I wonder if he can feel it, those glances, furtive and sharp as thin knives. A young mother paused, looked at her child, then looked away. The girl in red took off her headphones, glanced over, and continued scrolling on the screen. Mr. Jenkins coughed and closed his newspaper. No one said anything, but silence became the common language. At the counter, Lily saw him too. The smile remained on her lips, but her eyes faltered. She took a deep breath, turned, and poured coffee for another table. Evan opened his mouth. Lily, but she interrupted. I got it. Her voice was still soft, but there was something hard in her tone. Willow Diner was still warm, still bright, but not as intimate as a few minutes ago. Something cold was creeping through the air, thin as mist, but enough to be noticed by anyone paying attention. Harold took his time. He opened the menu, reading each line as if it were his first time here. Perhaps because he knew that sometimes, just by waiting, people would reveal their true nature. A silver-haired woman sitting nearby glanced at him, then bent down to her drink. The man with her whispered, "Let's just eat." They fell silent. I still remember the sound of knife and fork hitting the china plate, clear as a heartbeat in the room that was slowly losing its breath. Lily continued to walk past his desk. Twice, 3 times. Each time, she paused briefly, as if to remind herself not to look. Evan glanced at Mr. Harold. He saw him just sitting there, his hands clasped in front of him, his eyes looking out the window, where the light was still soft. If I told you he wasn't upset, would you believe me? I looked at him, and there was something about his calmness that made the whole bar look at themselves, though no one had noticed it yet. A new customer entered, and the bell rang again. But this time it was louder. Maybe it was an illusion, or maybe the atmosphere in the shop had changed. Willow Diner, once the warm kitchen of the neighborhood, is now a small stage where every look, every movement has meaning. No one speaks, but everyone is choosing their side, even if only silently. And in the corner of the room, the clock kept ticking. Harold Green sat there, calm as if time could not touch him. A black man in a sea of yellow light, and the glances did not dare to last more than 2 seconds. When the clock on the wall read 8:05, the door to Willow Diner opened again. The bell rang softly, the sound a stray note in the steady rhythm of the morning music. No one looked up immediately. In a place so accustomed to repetition, people rarely expected anything new, but then the silence began to spread slowly but surely. Mr. Harold Green stood in the doorway. His light gray suit was pressed. His shirt collar was white. His tie was pinstriped. His black shoes were polished. He leaned on an ebony cane in one hand and held a felt hat in the other. The light from the window cast a thin rim of light on his shoulders, like a trace of old memory. There was nothing unusual about him, just a well-dressed older man walking into a breakfast restaurant. But it seemed that it was this normality that made people pause. The faint clink of knives and forks. A man folds his newspaper. The young girl in the corner stops scrolling on her phone. The mother, who's feeding her baby, slows down, her spoon pausing in midair. Harold paused, his eyes scanning the bar. He wasn't looking for anything in particular, just choosing a seat like any other customer. But his gaze, calm and kind, unintentionally reflected other glances, brief, evasive, and judgmental. I don't know if he noticed it, or if he pretended not to. The experienced know that contempt rarely needs words. It can be in a glance, a turn away, or an unexplained delay. Harold chose the table by the window, an old, clean one, where the light streamed in long, slanting lines across the surface. He sat down, carefully set his hat aside, and removed his gloves. His movements were slow and methodical, as if he were honoring every minute of the morning. Lily, the waitress, stood at the counter and looked at him for a moment. Her gaze only lingered for half a second, but that half a second was enough for Evan, the young waiter, to realize something was wrong. "Do you want me to bring the menu over?" Evan asked, his voice low and somewhat shy. Lily pursed her lips, still smiling at the table next to her. "No need. He has the menu." Her voice was even, but short. Evan nodded and bent down to wipe the table. He tried not to look at Mr. Harold, but he could see his reflection in the steel counter. He was sitting upright, back straight, hands clasped, eyes looking out the window. No one said anything, but the atmosphere in the bar had changed. It was as if a thin string was pulling everyone together, not enough to suffocate, but making everyone more reserved in their movements. A group of 3 men entered and sat at a table near the door. They were talking animatedly, but their voices trailed off when their eyes met Mr. Harold's. One of them raised his eyebrows slightly and whispered something. The other smiled, but unnaturally. Evan heard a few words, but pretended not to. He felt uncomfortable without knowing why. Harold remained silent. He opened the menu, read each line, and nodded. Everything at the Willow Diner seemed the same: eggs, pancakes, bacon, coffee. He had ordered these things at hundreds of places in his life, but this morning, nothing was like this. I wondered if he had grown accustomed to this kind of silence, a silence that was not necessarily hostile, but a socially sanctioned distance. When he looked up, Lily was walking past. He smiled, raised his hand slightly, and made to order. She saw him, but pretended not to. For a split second then she turned and walked quickly to another table. A small moment, but no one missed it. A middle-aged man sitting near the counter frowned, as if about to say something, then stopped. The silver-haired woman just bowed her head, sighing softly. That silence, heavy, long, and full of complicity. Harold lowered his hand and smiled slightly. Not a bitter smile, but as if he had just confirmed something he had already expected. He wasn't angry. He just understood. The arm holding the cane tapped the floor lightly, rhythmically, like someone killing time. I didn't know what was going through his mind. Maybe it was weariness, maybe it was patience, or maybe he just knew it wasn't the first time, nor the last. Evan approached Lily, his voice low. "He's been waiting for a long time," she replied without looking at him. "I know." Her voice was cold and clear. He hesitated. "I think, Evan." She interrupted. "Do your job." He swallowed his words and turned away, his heart heavy. Evan had never seen anyone treated like this here, but he had never seen anyone dare say anything. Harold looked out the window again. Outside, a sparrow landed on the wooden platform, pecking at someone's forgotten pie crust. The sunlight touched his silver hair, making it shine like real silver. I think if anyone looked at him at that moment, they would see the image of someone who had gone through many storms and chosen to stand still in them. No one knew who Harold Green had been. No one thought the quiet man had once run a major southern trucking company. Now he was just a customer, old, polite, dark, sitting in a small breakfast restaurant in a quiet white town. A gentle breeze blew through the crack in the door, gently rustling the white curtains. The coffee still smelled fragrant, but it no longer tasted warm. At a table near the counter, Lily was laughing and talking with the regulars, but the laughter was forced. She glanced quickly at Mr. Harold, then looked away again. Perhaps she found his gaze too peaceful, too calm, too unsettling. I once heard it said, "It's not the screams that scare us. It's the silence that makes us see ourselves." That morning, Willow Diner saw itself in the kind eyes of a forgotten person. And somewhere, in the soft sunlight, justice is silently waiting for the moment to speak. The light in the Willow Diner gradually changed. As the sun rose higher, the morning rays were no longer gentle, they became harsh, casting harsh streaks of light on the tile floor. Lily Carson stood behind the counter, checking the order. The coffee machine hissed, and the smell of fresh espresso mixed with the scent of hot butter from the kitchen. She called inside 2 omelets, 1 medium rare steak, and extra bacon. Her voice was loud and energetic, as if her morning had never had room for hesitation. At the corner table, Mr. Harold Green remained silent. He turned the menu page over, his eyes moving slowly. Maybe he was reading, or pretending to read. I don't know. But there was something peaceful in his gaze, as if he were letting time speak for itself. Lily passed his table for the first time in 10 minutes, carrying a tray of coffee for the 2 people sitting near the door. As she passed Harold, their eyes met briefly, just for a second. She looked away, a little faster than usual, and I saw her lips tighten slightly, not in anger, just in reflex. There was something in the air that just closed. Mr. Harold nodded slightly, as if he understood. He didn't order again. He just gently put the menu down, clasped his hands together, and looked out the window where a sparrow had just landed on the railing. In the pale yellow light, his wooden staff gleamed. It had a small scratch near the handle, a mark of age, or perhaps of a long journey. I think there are people who can reveal the world around them just by sitting still. Harold was one of those people. At the next table, Lily smiled at a regular customer and said, "Your usual, right, Mr. Hawkins." Her voice was sweet and clear, her eyes bright. She poured him coffee, asked about the weather, then laughed when he joked, "Hope the coffee's stronger than my back today." She laughed. "Oh, I can make it double strong if you need a miracle." They both laughed. It was loud and clear, and then died away as she turned away. Just as her eyes met Harold's again, he sat there, calm, waiting. Nothing changed in his expression, the same polite expression of someone accustomed to the way the world sometimes forgets him. Lily turned and walked quickly into the kitchen. No one had called her, but she needed to get out of there, even if only for a moment. In the kitchen, the sizzling of the frying pan drowned out her heartbeat. Her hand tightened on the dish towel. She didn't know why she felt so flustered. All she could think was, "There's something about that man that makes him seem different from a regular customer." The thought crossed her mind unspoken, but enough to make her feel uneasy. Evan, the young waiter, opened the door and walked in, setting down the tray. "He hasn't ordered yet," Lily replied, not looking up. "I'm busy. I can bring the menu if no need." The words were firm, cold, and enough to silence Evan. He quietly walked back into the hall and looked toward Harold's desk. He saw him staring out the window, tapping his fingers on the table a slow rhythm, like an old song. No one noticed, but I knew it was his way of telling time. Inside the Willow Diner, time ticked with him. 30 minutes had passed since he entered. New customers arrived, old ones departed, and he remained a still point amid the constant movement. Someone glanced at him, then returned to their food. A woman whispered to her husband. Poor old man, maybe she didn't see him. The husband replied softly. She saw him. The answer is short, firm, and cold. I don't know why people can look so normal when they are doing wrong. Maybe because wrong, when repeated long enough, becomes a habit. Lily returned to the counter. She wiped down the table, collected the money, refilled the coffee. Everything was perfect. Everything was done correctly. Except for one thing. Harold's table was still empty. Harold didn't look at his watch. He just let out a small breath. A long breath, not of exhaustion, but of patience. When Lily passed by a third time, he looked up. "Excuse me, miss." His voice was soft, even, and clear. There was not a hint of demand or reproach. She paused for a moment, looking around as if he were talking to someone else. Then she turned and walked quickly away. Her white apron fluttered with her steps, like a sail caught in the wind. He bowed his head. The menu was still there, open in front of him. A drop of coffee someone had spilled on the table before him left a pale brown circle. He wiped it away with a paper towel slowly, carefully, as if keeping the table clean was the only thing he had control over. I looked at him and thought about the times people choose to be silent. Some people are silent because they are afraid. Some people are silent because they are tired. But he was different. He was silent because he understood that sometimes, if he spoke, people would not listen. They would only seek to prove that they were right. He chose to let the truth speak for itself. At the counter, Lily began to feel the eyes of a few customers. A silver-haired woman looked at her, then at Mr. Harold's table. Lily bit her lip, took a deep breath, and tried to look busy. She knew she was being watched, and that annoyed her more than anything. A voice inside her whispered, he could eat somewhere else. Another, weaker voice replied, but he did nothing wrong. She shook her head, dismissing the thought, smiling at the new customer who had just entered. Evan stood nearby, watching it all. He wanted to do something, but he didn't know what. Sometimes, I thought, the right thing isn't about the big action, it's about who steps forward. But this morning, no one stepped forward. Harold remained seated. Outside, the sun was high in the sky. Light streamed through the windows, illuminating his silver hair. It made him look like a brightly colored stone statue in the midst of a bustling room. I don't know how much time passed. I just know that in that moment, I realized sometimes patience is not just a virtue, it is a statement, a silent declaration. And at Willow Diner that morning, that declaration began to speak, not with words, but with a silence that made the whole room reflect on itself. There was something different about the atmosphere in Willow Diner, as if someone had turned the volume of the world down by half. The sounds of knives and forks hitting plates, chairs scraping, spoons stirring coffee, all of it was there, but quieter, disjointed, out of sync. No one said anything, but everyone saw it. Mr. Harold Green remained seated, quietly adjusting his napkin, his eyes kind and bright, and Lily Carson, the young waitress, continued to pass by his table as if he did not exist. The silence in the tavern was so thick that you could hear someone's swallowed sigh. At the table near the door sat a middle-aged woman with her son. She glanced at Harold, her brows furrowed slightly. It wasn't because he was being annoying, but because something about the scene made her uncomfortable. The boy, about 12, asked quietly, "Mom, why isn't that man getting any food?" She tugged at his hand, whispering, "Shh, don't stare." Then she bent down, opened her phone, and swiped at the screen as if busy, but her gaze kept coming back quick, brief, hesitant. "I think you know what's going on. It's just that, between right and easy, people often choose easy." In the corner, a young couple sat across from each other. They had just arrived, their coffee still steaming. The man who saw the scene first, Mr. Harold, raised his hand to call, and Lily walked away. He frowned, put down his cup. "Did you see that he asked?" The girl across from him replied in a small voice, "Maybe she didn't mean it. Didn't mean it." He said softly, "He's been sitting there for almost an hour." The girl fell silent, bending down to cut a piece of pancake. "Just eat," she whispered. "We're not part of it." "Not part of it," he repeated, chuckling a bitter laugh. I saw in his eyes the struggle between wanting to speak and fearing to be the center of attention. He turned away, then looked back at Mr. Harold. He was calm, and that calmness seemed embarrassing. At the counter, Mr. Jenkins, a regular who ordered the same thing every morning, put down his newspaper. He'd seen it all. He had served in the military. He knew what respect meant, what honor meant, but he also knew what it meant to keep your mouth shut. He cleared his throat, watching Lily pass. For a second, their eyes met. She knew what he wanted to say, but neither of them said anything. He just sighed, sipping his cold coffee. "It's not my place," he thought. And so, justice took another step back. I looked around the room. Each person there seemed to be living in their own story, but bound by the same invisible thread, the thread of fear and indifference. An elderly woman sat near the counter. She clutched her handbag tightly to her chest, her eyes fixed on the wall mirror, avoiding Mr. Harold's gaze. It was a small gesture, but in the reflection, I saw her eyes wet and guilty. At the back of the room, Evan, the young waiter, stood motionless. He looked at Lily, then at Harold, then at the other customers. No one said anything. No one did anything. He opened his mouth, then closed it. Just an old man. A voice in his head said, "But a man." Another voice replied. He swallowed, gripping the towel so tightly his knuckles turned white. Outside the window, the sun was pouring down on the street. The bus slowly passed by, leaving a trail of dust floating in the air. A child rode his bike past, laughing. Life outside continued, as if nothing was wrong in this cafe, but mistakes, I think, don't always have to be loud. Sometimes it just requires the silence of enough people. A plate fell from the other table and broke. The sound was sudden and sharp, startling everyone. Lily turned around and quickly bent down to pick up the broken pieces. Mr. Harold looked up, then nodded slightly, not because of anything major, but because he knew sometimes the sound of breaking is the only thing that can wake people up. Lily felt his gaze. She looked up, met his gaze for a moment, then she bent down again, picking up the last piece. No one said a word. Outside, the wind gently shook the sign Willow Diner since 1956. The white paint was peeling in some corners, a memory of a time when everyone is welcome. Inside, that promise is wavering. A young man sitting near the window finally spoke up, his voice low. She should serve him. No one answered. Another man, older, just shook his head. Don't get involved. Son, it's not worth it. Not worth it. I heard him repeat, slowly looking down at his coffee, as if asking himself if the right thing isn't worth doing. Then what is? The silence in the bar was no longer light. It was heavy, like a damp blanket draped over everyone. Every gaze was wary. Everyone knew what was going on, and everyone hoped someone else would be the first to speak. But no one did. Mr. Harold adjusted his cane and sat up straight. There was no anger or resentment on his face, only a calmness that made those around him feel small. Evan saw it. He turned around, saw Lily wiping the counter, trying to look busy. He wanted to go over, to say, "Let me serve him," but his feet wouldn't move. He knew if he did, people would look, and the look was more powerful than words. I think it's strange how people can see wrong and choose to look away at the same time, as if by pretending not to see, they believe the wrong will disappear. But justice doesn't disappear. It just stands there, silently, waiting for someone to dare to look at it. And that morning, in the Willow Diner, all eyes were downcast, except one, Mr. Harold Green. Inside the Willow Diner, the morning seemed to last longer than usual. The sunlight outside had changed color from pale yellow to harsh white. What had been warm now turned to cold light, shining through the glass and reflecting off the steel tables. Lily Carson moved between the tables, her smile never wavering. She asked questions, she joked, she wished the guests have a lovely morning in a bright, even voice. All was proper, all was as usual. There was only one difference every time she passed Mr. Harold Green's desk. The smile faded, not vanished, but was caught midway. Her eyes darted slightly away, avoiding his calm gaze. She served a silver-haired man more coffee, straightened a tablecloth for a young couple, picked up a fallen note near the counter. Everything was natural, neat, but I knew with every step she was avoiding something. Mr. Harold Green was still sitting in the same place, near the window. His hand was on his cane, his palm slightly open, as if he let go, everything would fall away. The menu was still open on the table. The napkin he had used to wipe away the coffee was neatly folded. No one came near him. No one asked what he needed. No one spoke of it again. But the silence now had a weight. It was like a thin layer of dust hanging in the air, visible to everyone, but no one willing to brush it away, afraid that if it were touched, everything would explode. Lily passed his table for the fourth time in an hour, carrying a tray of orange juice and pancakes for the table next to hers. As she approached, Mr. Harold gently raised his hand, a polite, unhurried gesture. "Excuse me, miss." His voice was low and calm, no higher than the sound of a spoon clinking a glass. She stopped, or almost stopped. Her eyes met his for a second, then slid away, as if there was something in that look that she couldn't bear. She pursed her lips, nodded to another table, and kept walking. The kitchen door opened, closing behind her as a temporary escape. I looked at him. He wasn't angry. He wasn't disappointed. Just a small, fleeting smile, as if he'd just confirmed something he already knew. He pulled an old pocket watch from his pocket. The silver case was scratched, but the hands still moved smoothly. He looked at it, folded it, and set it aside. The movement was slow, precise, and gentle enough to make the room seem quieter. Maybe that's how he keeps himself letting time do its work, not emotions. Lily entered the kitchen, her breathing more rapid than usual. She leaned against the wall, clutching the empty tray. Her heart was pounding, not from fatigue, but from a different feeling both strange and familiar. She didn't want to think she was doing anything wrong. She was just doing her job. And in this business, everyone knows who is easy to work with and who is easy to avoid. But the image of Mr. Harold sitting quietly in the corner kept coming back to her mind. His hands, his upright posture, his kind, deep gaze. She felt annoyed with herself. Why does he look like that, she thought, as if he were waiting for her to realize something she didn't want to face. Evan walked into the kitchen, holding an empty coffee cup. "Do you want me to take this to him?" he asked softly. Lily turned away, shaking her head. "No." But Evan. Her voice was hard. He fell silent. The kitchen door closed, separating them from the other room, where silence still awaited. Outside, a few new guests had arrived. The atmosphere seemed livelier, but only on the surface. Beneath the artificial noise, the awkwardness was still there, so obvious that one could hear it if one stopped to listen. Mr. Harold looked out the window. Outside, the wind gently shook the willow trees in front of the shop. The light fell on his face, highlighting every wrinkle, the lines of a life lived but never bowed. I don't know what he was thinking. Maybe it was about his youth, about the times he had to wait, the times he had to be silent, or maybe he wasn't thinking at all. He just understood that there are conversations where words can never overcome a look. When Lily returned to the hall, she avoided the path near his desk. She circled further, pretending to wipe the table in the opposite corner. Anyone paying attention would have noticed, and the more she avoided him, the more tension filled the room. Evan walked past, glanced at her, then looked at Harold. His eyes were full of question, a concern that adults often called fairness and young people called right. He wanted to say something, but when he saw the way Lily smiled at the table next to him, a perfect, professional smile, he stopped. He understood there was no room for dissent here. Lily poured more coffee for the customer, collected the money, thanked him, smiled, and continued working. But her hand trembled slightly as she touched the glass. She didn't know why, but she felt as if someone was looking right through her. She turned around. Mr. Harold was still sitting there, calm, his eyes neither accusing nor reproachful. He just looked. That look made her feel like she was standing in front of a mirror. For a brief moment, I felt the room stop breathing. No one spoke, but everyone knew what was happening here was no longer a matter of slow or fast service, but a test of human hearts. Indifference, when long enough, becomes insult. Patience, when deep enough, becomes power. And that morning in the Willow Diner, the one with real power wasn't the waitress in the white apron, but the man sitting quietly in the corner, waiting quietly without anyone's pity. Outside, the wind rustles the since 1956 sign. The sound of metal clanking against metal is a distant reminder that this place was built on the belief that everyone is served equally. But today, that faith is being tested, not by argument, but by silence. Inside the shop, Lily's smile was still bright. She passed his table again without stopping. No one called to her. No one intervened. Only Mr. Harold's eyes, still watching, still gentle, still bright, as if he himself were witnessing the destruction of something she had not yet recognized. And I, in that moment, understood that sometimes refusing to serve is not just about a cup of coffee, but the way people test each other with silence. The morning at Willow Diner continued as if nothing were unusual. New customers arrived, ordered, and talked and laughed just loud enough to drown out the strange silence that lingered around the corner table by the window where Harold Green still sat. No one paid any attention to the clock, but Evan Brooks glanced at it several times. The minute hand had just struck 12 again, almost 2 o'clock, and he still hadn't been served. He didn't understand how this could happen in a small bar like this. Everyone saw it, but no one did anything. Lily walked past, a tray of cookies in her hands. Evan stopped and called softly, "Lily, he's still waiting." She gave him a quick, knife-like glance. "I know." Her voice was dry, cold, and heavy as a closed steel door. Evan opened his mouth to continue, but she turned and walked away. Her white apron flapped behind her like a flag of surrender. He stood there, alone, in the middle of the empty lobby. A customer called out, "Kid, another coffee here." Startled, he turned to the waiter, trying to act normal, but his hand shook slightly as he poured the coffee, a few drops spilling onto the saucer. The regular man smiled. "Relax, son. It's just coffee." "Yes, sir," Evan replied, smiling wryly. "Just coffee. But you know, the table across the table is still empty, and there's a man sitting there, staring out the window, waiting." "Mr." Harold gently turned the empty coffee cup on the table, the same one he had left since his arrival, and no one had replaced it. He wiped the rim of the cup with a napkin, replaced it properly, and looked around. No one was looking at him. Even the people sitting nearby were avoiding his gaze. His posture, straight and composed, made Evan feel claustrophobic. It was like a mirror reflecting the cowardice of the entire room. Evan looked toward the counter. Lily was smiling at the other customers, bowing her head, clearing the table with the confidence of someone doing her duty. He bit his lip, stepped closer, and whispered, "Can I get him some water?" Lily didn't look up. "No need. But Evan, I told you, I know what I'm doing." Her voice was even and low, but enough to make him back down. A moment of silence passed between them. Then she bent down to wipe the table, wiping it with more force than necessary. "Keep your mouth shut," she added, softly but sharply. Evan turned away, his throat tight. He didn't understand. He'd only been here 3 months and he'd never seen anything like this. In school, they taught him about respect, about how every customer deserves the same service, about work ethics. But this morning, All those lessons seemed to dissolve in the coffee fumes. He felt like he was standing between two worlds. One was the right thing, and the other was everyone still does it. A new customer came in. Lily waved, her voice bright again. Evan watched, as if she had forgotten everything. He wasn't angry, just sorry. Then his eyes turned back to Mr. Harold. The man was still there, quiet, as if time had stopped touching him. His hand was on his cane, and his pocket watch lay next to the menu. The afternoon light shone through the window, illuminating his silver hair, making it shine like a silver ring around his head. There was something both gentle and strong in his stillness, like the calmness of someone who has understood everything about the world and no longer needs to prove anything. Evan swallowed. He looked around Lily, Jenkins, the young couple, the woman with her son. No one looked at him. No one said anything. The entire bar fell silent. He felt his throat dry. Is this right? He asked himself. If so, why did it make him feel so ashamed? I saw his shoulders shaking, not from fear of being yelled at, but from fear that he was being part of something wrong. A moment later, Lily walked by, holding a tray of cookies. Evan called out again, "Lily, I'm sorry, but he's been waiting too long." She stopped, glanced at him. There was no malice in her eyes, just weariness. "Evan," she said, her voice low, "sometimes it's best not to get involved." Then she walked away, the tray shaking slightly with her breathing. He watched, feeling as if he had just heard a paradoxical admonition. Don't get involved in wrong things. The words, said quickly, made sense, but repeated over and over in his head. They became painfully wrong. Mr. Harold bent down to pick up a napkin that had fallen to the floor. Someone passing by had dropped it. No one had noticed. He placed it back on the table, carefully, as if it were a precious thing. The gesture was small, but it made Evan want to cry. There was something about the way he did everything, patient, gentle, unconcerned, that made him feel ashamed for all of them. He turned back to Lily. She was talking to the customers, laughing. The sound was like wood on metal, fake and cold. Evan looked around and saw Jenkins still sitting at the counter, peeking over his shoulder at the newspaper. The young couple bent over their phones. The middle-aged mother continued cutting the cake for her child. No one had changed. Everything was the same, as if time in the restaurant had stopped at an acceptable level. He took a deep breath. Part of him wanted to go to Mr. Harold's desk and ask if he needed help. But another part, the part that had learned not to be different from the crowd, held him back. And I know that's the moment when morality starts to fight a survival instinct. Mr. Harold raised his head, and his eyes met his. No words, just a look deep, quiet, and understanding, as if he were saying, "You don't have to defend me. Just remember what's right never makes you wrong." Evan bowed his head. He didn't know why his eyes stung. I think perhaps everyone in life has been Evan, knowing what is right, but choosing to remain silent because of fear of being misunderstood, because of fear of losing their position, because of fear that a small voice cannot change anything. But there are people like Mr. Harold who, just by sitting still, are enough to make the world around them reflect on themselves. And that boy, that morning, began to change, not by actions, but by a look that no longer avoided. Inside the Willow Diner, time seemed to be stuck between two breaths. Outside, the sun was high in the sky, but the light streaming through the windows was not enough to dispel the strange chill that permeated the restaurant. The chill didn't come from the weather, it came from the silence. Mr. Harold Green sat in the same place, by the window, where the light fell on half his face, half in light, half in shadow. It was as if the world itself were looking through him. The menu was still open in front of him. He read it over, slowly, carefully, even though he had memorized each item since that morning. Eggs, bacon, toast. His voice was low and even, as if he were reviewing an old lesson, a lesson in patience. No one said anything, but everyone heard him reading. Evan Brooks stood near the counter, his eyes still on him. He felt his chest tighten. He knew there was no reason for him to wait so long, but no one would let him. Lily Carson walked past, tray in hand. She pretended not to look, but her eyes still flickered over Mr. Harold's figure. There was something in her gaze like hidden confusion. She placed the tray on the table beside her, smiled professionally, "Enjoy your meal." Then she turned and walked quickly toward the kitchen, where she could breathe again. The sound of knives and forks clanking against each other suddenly became louder than usual. Those small sounds, which normally went unnoticed, now sounded like nails being hammered into the wall. A customer tapped his spoon against his glass, just to pass the time. But the sound startled a few others. The atmosphere in the restaurant seemed to tighten. I have a feeling if someone drops one more spoon, it will all break. An older man at a table near the door turned to Jenkins and said softly, "Why isn't she serving him?" Jenkins shrugged, not looking up. "Don't ask me. Still, it doesn't feel right. Nothing feels right these days." Jenkins replied, then pretended to read the newspaper. I realized that there was not indifference in that statement, but a kind of old weariness, the weariness of someone who has witnessed too many wrongs, and too few people dare to correct them. In the corner of the room, the little boy sitting with his mother still looked at Mr. Harold. He asked softly, "Mom, why's he alone?" The mother gently pulled her son's hand down. "Don't look, honey." But the little boy still looked, his eyes innocent and curious, a look that knew no discrimination nor fear. He only saw a person waiting, and sometimes just a child's gaze is enough to make adults feel small. Harold sat there, unmoving. His fingers tapped lightly on the table, a slow, steady beat, like an old clock in a quiet house. Not angry, but the beat of a man trying to keep himself calm in an unfair world. The light reflected off the window glass, casting his shadow on the table. It looked lonely, but steady. I don't know what he was thinking, but I felt it in that silence. He was seeing everything not just with his eyes, but with his memory. Maybe he was remembering the years he stood before other doors, also rejected, also judged, and still chose to smile. Evan walked toward the kitchen, trying to catch his breath. He saw Lily standing behind the counter, washing glasses, her hands shaking slightly. She was avoiding her own eyes in the mirror. "Are you going to serve him?" he asked. This time not softly enough to be hidden by the noise. Lily paused, still holding her glass. "Evan, I told you, it's none of your business, but he just sat there. He didn't say anything. That's why. The sentence, short, fell between them like a confession. She was not afraid of his speaking. She was afraid of his silence. He was about to say more, but stopped. At that moment, Mr. Harold gently folded the menu. The sound of the paper hitting the table was very faint, but it made the whole restaurant stop for a moment. He stood up, not too fast, not too slow, just enough to get everyone's attention. His wooden stick tapped on the floor knock, knock, 3 times, regularly. The sound echoed in the silence like the beat of a drum in an old ritual. Lily looked up, her hand gripping the glass so tightly her knuckles turned white. He said nothing, just adjusted his coat and looked around. His gaze passed over each person. No blame, no demands, just a feeling of being seen. Everyone avoided his gaze, as if they were afraid he was seeing through their self-justifications. A drop of water fell from the glass Lily was holding onto the floor, clack, with a loud clang. No one picked it up, no one moved, I know. The storm is brewing not from action, but from silence. A storm without noise, without wind, without thunder, just a change in the eyes of those present. Harold sat back down. The gesture was so gentle that it made the atmosphere in the cafe even more tense. He didn't move, didn't react, just sat. His determination, for a moment, forced the entire room to look at him. Evan stepped back, clutching the towel. He wanted to move, but his legs wouldn't obey. Lily stood still, her eyes glued to the counter, not daring to look up. Jenkins sighed, folded the newspaper, and called out, "Check, please." His voice was hoarse, but no one answered. Evan understood he just wanted to get out of this atmosphere. Another woman stood up and walked quickly to the door, leaving the cold tinkling of the bell. The smell of coffee in the shop was still there, but the taste seemed to have changed. Outside, the wind blew harder, making the Willow Diner sign swing with a creaking sound. Inside, no one said another word, only the slow, rhythmic tapping of Mr. Harold's wooden stick against the tile floor remained like a clock counting down to the moment when everything would change. I looked at him and realized sometimes storms don't come from those who scream the loudest, but from those who hold still the longest. And in that silence, I felt the bar cracking little by little, because not everyone can bear to have their conscience exposed by another person's serenity. Inside the Willow Diner, the atmosphere was so thick it felt like it was about to burst. The clock on the wall ticked slowly and evenly, as if measuring the silence of the people in the restaurant. No one spoke. No one dared to breathe loudly. Mr. Harold Green sat there as still as if he were part of the picture hanging on the wall. His hand rested on his cane, his head tilted toward the window, where the sunlight was fading. Outside, the wind rustled through the willows. Inside, the air was thick, heavy, and fragile. Then, clang. The doorbell rang. It was a familiar sound, but this time it was strangely clear, as if cutting through the silence of the room. All eyes turned to the door. A woman entered. She wore a crisp, cream-colored suit and polished heels, and walked with a steady, measured step, as if she knew exactly what she was getting into. Her black hair was tied back in a bun, a few strands fallen around her sharp, warm face. On her wrist, the gold watch reflected the midday light, a light that seemed to have disappeared from the restaurant. She stopped right in the middle of the aisle, her eyes scanning around quick, precise, and then stopping at the corner of the window. That look, when it touched Mr. Harold, changed completely, from calm to emotional, from distant to familiar. She called softly, her voice clear and full of warmth, "Dad." The sound sent a deafening silence through the room. Evan dropped the towel in his hand. Lily froze, her hand holding the tray frozen in midair. The entire bar froze, then went into a state of confusion. Dad? Did she just call him Dad? I could feel the surprised eyes darting around, as if someone had just turned on a light in the dark room they were used to living in. Sophia walked towards Mr. Harold, each step sure, no hesitation, no reserve. She passed Lily, her high heels clicking lightly on the tile floor. Clunk, clunk, clunk. The sound echoed in everyone's heads. Approaching the table, she bent down and hugged her father. The hug was light, but enough to break the ice in the air. "You're late," she whispered, her voice trembling with emotion. "Mr. Harold smiled, his hand on his daughter's shoulder, a gentle smile as if nothing else mattered. "I knew you would come," he replied, his voice low and soft as smoke. Lily stood still, watching the two of them. Her eyes were filled with a mixture of emotions, surprise, confusion, and then something close to regret. She had never thought that the man she had ignored all morning would have someone call him father with such respect, love, and pride. She didn't know what to do, whether to step forward or retreat, but her feet wouldn't move. Evan Brooks was the first to move. He bent down to pick up the fallen towel, placed it back on the table, and looked up at the father and son. Relief was evident on his face, as if justice had finally spoken not in words, but in the presence of a person. Dad. The word still echoed in his head, a normal word, but in this situation, it carried the power of 1,000 objections. I looked around. Everyone was standing still, watching the scene as if it were something sacred they had never seen before. The man who had been ignored, who had been avoided, was now embraced openly, without hesitation, without reserve. No one knew who she was, but the way she walked, the way she spoke, the way every detail of her person exuded confidence, everyone understood she was no ordinary person. Lily dropped the tray. The sound was like metal hitting the floor. Clang. Everyone turned to look at her. She bent down and hastily picked it up, her hands shaking. "Sorry, I'm sorry," she whispered, almost inaudibly, but no one answered. Sophia turned her head to look at her. Her eyes were calm, but there was something in them that made Lily lower her head. Not angry, not contemptuous, just the look of someone who knew the truth without needing to say it. "Have you been waiting long?" "It's okay. I'm used to it." "Mr. Harold said, his voice soft, but I heard the depth of it, a sadness that had become habitual. Sophia put her hand on his shoulder, her eyes warming. "You shouldn't have to wait. The statement wasn't just for him, it was for the whole room, and everyone understands that." Evan lowered his head, feeling his eyes burning. Jenkins sniffed softly, pretending to have dust in his eyes. The middle-aged mother squeezed her son's hand and sighed softly. No one said it, but they all knew it. They had just witnessed something that no newspaper, no speech could do a truly human moment. Lily stood still, her hands gripping the tray so tightly that her fingers were red. She felt a heavy feeling, shame and regret. She wanted to say something, to apologize, but the words were stuck in her throat, and perhaps the only thing she could do was look. Sophia didn't blame her. She just nodded slightly at her, as if to say, "I understand." But that very nod made Lily turn away, unable to bear that kindness. Sophia then turned to Evan, smiling. "You work here?" Evan nodded, confused. Yes, ma'am. Thank you for not turning away." That statement left him speechless. He didn't understand how she knew, but perhaps those who really observed could see who chose to remain silent and who didn't. Mr. Harold stood up and straightened his coat. Sophia put her arm around him. Together, father and son walked to the door, the sound of canes tapping the tile floor and high heels, knock, 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 combined into a strange rhythm, like the heartbeat of the room returning after a pause. As the door opened, light flooded in, spilling across the floor and washing over the still flustered faces. Then the door closed, taking the two figures with it, but leaving something very different behind. Not silence, but awareness. I sat there for a long time, listening to the timid clink of knives and forks. No one spoke of what had just happened, but everyone knew that the Willow Diner would never be the same again, because sometimes just a timely dad is enough to make the whole world bow down. The door to Willow Diner closed behind the Greens, but the shock of that moment lingered in the room. It was as if the words "Dad" still hung in the air, echoing, seeping through the brick walls, into every corner of the table. No one said anything, no one moved. All was engulfed in an eerie silence, a silence that was no longer indifference, but sudden awakening. Evan was the first to notice. He was still standing near the counter, the towel crumpled in his hand. His eyes followed the door where the light had come in, and I knew there was a storm raging inside him, louder than any wind outside. Across the bar, Lily Carson hadn't moved. She was frozen in place, her hands still holding the empty tray. Her face was turning red with embarrassment, replaced by the white of realization. No one needed to tell her what had just happened. She knew too well. The man she had been indifferent to, the man she had deliberately ignored, the man she had even avoided like a blemish in her vision, turned out to be the father of that elegant woman. The woman had just entered, causing the entire room to fall silent with her charisma. She swallowed, trying to rationalize it in her head. Coincidence, perhaps? No way. But then that word "Dad" echoed in my memory, clear and sharp as a knife. There was no mistake. At the next table, Jenkins put down his newspaper. For the first time in years, he was at a loss for words. He looked around, saw the other faces looking at each other as if everyone wanted to ask the same question, but no one dared to be the first to speak. The middle-aged woman sitting with her son let out a soft sigh. "Oh my God." Her voice trembled. It was unclear whether it was from shame or fear. The child beside her asked Mom, "Who is she?" She looked at her son and softly replied, "Probably someone everyone should learn to get to know." Sophia turned back. She hadn't quite left. The door was still open, and she was standing there in the noon light, which was now almost blinding. Everyone raised their heads. Their eyes met hers, and for a moment, no one saw the stranger anymore. Instead, there was an image of calm power, a power that needed no proof, no loud voice. She took a step inside. Her expression changed no longer the warm smile she had when talking to her father, but a look so cold, focused, and sharp that one did not dare to look at it for long. Her eyes stopped on Mr. Harold's desk where the empty coffee cup and folded menu still lay. She looked around. Her eyes fell on Lily, and for a moment, nothing could be heard but the ticking of the clock on the wall. Sophia walked slowly to the table, her shoes clicking lightly on the floor. She looked down at her glass. The dried liquid on the rim was a mark of the long silence. She put her hands on the back of the chair and looked up at Lily. How long? Has he been waiting? Her voice was not loud, but it was so strong that people could hear every word. Lily opened her mouth, but her throat was dry. I'm not sure. Sophia interrupted. Not sure. They don't serve my father, and you're not sure? The air seemed to be sucked out of the room. Evan froze. This, he knew, was the moment everything would change. Not with anger, but with truth. He could clearly see the trembling in Lily's hands. She bowed her head, her lips moving. I am busy with customers. Sophia smiled slightly. It was not a smile of mockery, but of deep disappointment. Busy, she repeated, then glanced around. So everyone here is busy. No one answered. I remember the faces of the customers clearly. Everyone avoided her eyes. Jenkins pretending to pick up the newspaper, the middle-aged woman looking down at her hands, the young couple fumbling with their phones. No one said anything, no one admitted it, but everyone knew they were all part of this. The silence now was no longer indifference, but collective shame. Sophia took a step back, exhaled. Then she spoke softly, her voice low but still full of weight. You know what the worst thing is? It's not that you didn't serve him. It's that none of you thought it was wrong. The voice was not loud, but it cut through the air like a knife through silk. Soft, yet sharp. Lily bit her lip. Her eyes welled with tears, her hands clenching the rim of the tray. I'm sorry, I didn't mean. No intention, Sophia interrupted. Discrimination never requires intention. It only requires the silence of those who see but do not speak. Every word she spoke made the small space tremble. Evan bowed his head slightly, not out of fear, but out of respect. Sophia turned to look at the empty table, her voice softening. He once taught me that a person is not measured by the color of their skin, but by how they treat others when no one is watching. She paused. Her gaze swept over everyone, every face, until it stopped on Lily. Thank you for teaching me that lesson. Again, today, not a blame, but it hurts everyone. She walked toward the door. People moved aside, no one daring to stop her. As she passed Evan, she stopped, looked at him, and nodded slightly. You'll be fine. Keep your courage. Evan was speechless, just nodded, his heart beating fast. Then she opened the door and stepped outside. The bell tinkled again, but it sounded different now, not harsh, but clearer, as if it were giving way to something new. The door closed, and Willow Diner fell silent again. But this time, the silence was not avoidance, it was awareness. Lily stood there, tears streaming down her face, unaware. Jenkins put down the newspaper and muttered, "God, I really sat here, watching all this, and said nothing." The middle-aged woman hugged her son and whispered, "Remember, son, never stay silent when you see someone being treated unfairly." I looked back at the table where Mr. Harold sat. The menu was still there. The cup was still cold. But something was starting to warm up inside everyone. Not coffee, but conscience. The door to the Willow Diner was still ajar, and the breeze from outside crept in through the cracks, making the curtains sway. The golden light of late afternoon fell to the floor, shimmering like water. Sophia stood there between light and shadow, between two extremes of the same world. She didn't leave, and that made everyone in the bar understand this wasn't over. Lily Carson remained behind the counter, clutching her tray as if to shield her from Sophia's gaze. Sweat beaded at her temples. She dared not look up, but she could feel Sophia's footsteps approaching. The sound of high heels clicking on the floor clunk, clunk, clunk was steady and slow, but each beat made Lily's heart clench a little more. Sophia stopped a few feet from the counter. She didn't speak right away. She let the silence fill the room, a silence so heavy it made everyone feel like they had to hold their breath. Then she asked, her voice calm but cold to the point of being chilling, "Can you tell me, why was my father left there?" The question was as soft as a breath, but it froze the room. Evan, standing near the kitchen door, shrugged. Jenkins turned away, pretending to straighten the crumpled newspaper. Lily pressed her lips together, her hands still clasping the tray. I was busy serving another table," she whispered, her voice breaking. Sophia's expression did not change. "So busy that you can't bring him a cup of coffee?" "I didn't mean to," Lily continued, her eyes still on the floor. "I just had too many guests." There was a moment of silence. Then Sophia smiled slightly, very slightly, but there was no satisfaction in it. "Don't lie," she interrupted, her voice low and sharp like a knife cutting through thin cloth. "You know exactly what you did, and everyone in this bar saw it." The air became thick. The sound of knives and forks, the stirring of coffee spoons, all disappeared. What remained was the confrontation between the two women, one bearing the authority of morality, the other the burden of guilt. Lily bowed her head more deeply. She knew she couldn't hide. I saw her shoulders shake, not just from fear of losing her job, but from the stark truth she had just been told. Sophia did not take another step. She stood still, her gaze fixed, cold but not cruel. I realized this is not an argument. This is a moral judgment, but there is no court, no judge. There are only witnesses, and the facts speak for themselves. Sophia spoke slowly, each word clearly. "I have been coming to this restaurant since I was a child. I remember every waiter, every table and chair, every smell of bacon in the kitchen. This place was where my father taught me about respect, that no one is less than anyone else, just because they don't wear a suit or don't have a gold credit card." She paused, her eyes fixed on Lily. "But today, my father sits here, and no one finds him worthy of a single question." Evan sucked in a breath. His chest tightened at the truth. He wanted to help, to defend Lily, but then he realized there were no words that could make any difference. Lily mumbled, "I have no ill intentions." Sophia tilted her head. It doesn't take malice to do wrong, just enough indifference. Lily was silent, her lips pressed together, her eyes welling up with tears. A single tear fell, shattering on the white tiles. Sophia turned to the surrounding guests. You all saw it, right? No one answered, but everyone bowed their heads. The question did not require an answer. It was just meant to be a reflection on each person's heart. The middle-aged woman hugged her son tighter. Jenkins sighed, his voice hoarse. We all saw it. Sophia nodded slightly. That's enough. She turned back to Lily. Her voice softened, but not weakened. I don't mean to insult you. I just want you to understand, what you didn't just hurt one man. You made this whole place smaller, and you smaller because of it. She stopped. Lily looked up for the first time. Her eyes red. I'm sorry, she said, her voice choking. I really am sorry. I didn't know who you were. Sophia shook her head slightly. That's the point. You don't need to know who he is to treat him right. Evan clutched the handkerchief in his hand, as if he were holding on to the hope that there might be time to make things right. He took a half-step forward, but Sophia signaled him to stop. She looked around the shop, her voice low, deep and deep. I will not ask anyone to lose their job today, because justice does not lie in revenge. It lies in people looking at themselves. No one moved, but I knew every single person in that room had just heard their own conscience. Sophia turned and walked towards the door. Lily stood still, her hands hanging down, her eyes following her. She wanted to say more, but her throat felt blocked. Only Sophia's heavy breathing and footsteps echoed in the cafe. She walked past her father's old desk, placing her hand lightly on the back of the chair, a small gesture that held both pain and pride. Then she looked out the glass door, where the last light of day was pouring down like a thin golden curtain. Silence may be justice, she said softly, but today it may also be a crime. That sentence echoed, disappeared into the air, but remained in everyone's heart. When Sophia left, the shop was still dead silent. Only when the doorbell rang again, everyone couldn't help but let out a long sigh, as if a storm had just passed. Lily sat down on the chair, her face in her hands, tears streaming down her face. Evan put his hand on her shoulder, saying nothing. No words were needed, just a hand to remind her that change was possible. Jenkins folded the newspaper and whispered, She's right. Justice doesn't need to shout, if only we listen when it whispers. I left the bar that day with a strange feeling, as if I had just witnessed a trial where the judge was conscience and the verdict was silence. And in that silence, I realized sometimes the most powerful response to an insult is not to fight back, but to let the truth stand on its own. The air in Willow Diner seemed to freeze at Sophia's last words. Everyone expected her to walk out, leaving behind a storm of realization and conscience. But Sophia paused, her hand on the doorknob. Then she slowly turned around. A faint ray of light filtered through the curtains, illuminating her face, half light, half dark. Her eyes were no longer angry, but the look of someone about to tell the truth, the look that could change the room forever. Lily was still standing behind the counter, her eyes red, her hands shaking, the metal tray slightly bent at the edges. Evan watched silently, his heart pounding as if he knew something was about to happen, something irreversible. Sophia took a step forward, her voice calm and soft, but each word fell like a stone on water. "The man you've been ignoring all morning." She paused. The whole restaurant fell silent. "Is my father." It was as if all the sounds in the shop had been sucked out. There was no sound of fans, no sound of spoons clinking glasses, no sound of customers breathing. There was only a huge empty space where all eyes were on her. Lily opened her mouth, her lips moving, but no sound came out. Her face paled, and her hands slowly let go of the tray. It fell to the floor with a loud clatter that echoed throughout the room. Sophia remained still, her eyes never leaving Lily. "And one more thing," she said, her voice low, just audible, but breathless. Evan felt his heart stop. He looked around. The customers sat still, their eyes glued to the woman. Someone set down a cup of coffee, shaking it slightly, making a small, ominous sound. Sophia looked around, her eyes scanning each person, then stopping at the sign hanging behind the counter, where small metal letters read "Willow Diner since 1982. She walked slowly up to the counter, her hand lightly touching the worn wooden edge. "You probably don't know," she said slowly, "but I own this restaurant." The words fell like a thunderbolt on a sunny day. In that moment, the whole space seemed to explode, but not with sound, but with a look. Jenkins dropped the newspaper from his hand. The middle-aged woman clutched her chest and blurted out, "Oh my God." Evan stood there, unable to believe his ears, and Lily took a step back as if someone had just pushed her hard in the chest. "Ah, what did you say?" Lily's voice trembled, breaking in the heavy air. Sophia looked at her, her eyes unwavering. "I am Sophia Green, daughter of Mr. Harold Green, and I'm the one who bought this restaurant 2 years ago." She paused, her voice steady. "I kept the same team, believing that this place still retained the kind spirit it once had. But today, you proved me wrong." Lily sank down into the chair. She was speechless, everything in front of her blurred, leaving only the image of the old man sitting quietly in the corner of the window, looking out with a calm gaze. She suddenly remembered he wasn't angry, didn't blame, didn't rush. He was just waiting, the quiet waiting that she had despised. Now she understood he may not speak, but he was never the weak one. Sophia continued speaking, slowly but firmly. "I don't tell you this to brag or scare anyone. I tell you this so that you and everyone here will remember that power isn't about the suit or the color of your skin. It's about how you treat other people, especially when you think they have nothing to offer in return." Each word she spoke was like a mirror that reflected back into the room. No one dared to look up, not because they were afraid of her, but because they were afraid of seeing themselves in it. Doe. Evan stood in the corner of the cafe, looking at Sophia with admiration. He understood that this was not just a statement. This was justice spoken with wisdom, calmly, without any intention of revenge. He had never seen anyone so strong, someone who could make an entire room bow with just a soft voice. Lily stood up shakily. She wanted to say something, an apology, a justification, a plea, but her throat felt tight. All she could manage was a few broken words. I don't know. If I knew." Sophia interrupted, her voice soft but firm. "You don't need to know. Kindness shouldn't need a reason." Lily burst into tears. Her sobs echoed in the dead silence. No one dared to comfort her. No one dared to intervene, because they knew Sophia wasn't humiliating her. She was saving her. A breeze blew through the door, shaking the Willow Diner sign. Sophia looked up at it, then said softly, her voice breathy, "This is where my father used to come every morning. He loved this place because it was a symbol of hospitality. I will not let it become a symbol of silence and prejudice." Jenkins stepped out of his seat and slowly approached. He nodded, his voice low. "Miss Green, I think you have taught us a lesson that none of us here will forget." Sophia smiled and nodded. "The lesson didn't come from me, Mr. Jenkins," she said, "but from my father, who chose calm over anger, who chose patience to give people a chance to see themselves." Another silence, this time not heavy, but soft. Evan bowed his head, almost saying to himself, "That is true strength." Sophia looked around one last time. Her eyes fell on Lily, who was now sitting, her hands covering her face. "Tomorrow," she said, "come back to work. I'm not firing you, but I want you to be my father's first waitress." The whole bar held its breath. Lily looked up, her eyes swollen, not believing her ears. "Why?" "Didn't you fire me?" Sophia replied, her voice as calm as water, "because if I did, I would be no different than you were before." A stronger wind blew, making the curtains flutter. Sophia stepped to the door, her hand pushing gently, flooding the room with light. When the door closed, Willow Diner was still silent, but now the silence had a different flavor. No more fear, no more guilt, but awakening. I sat back and looked at Mr. Harold's desk by the window. The chair was empty, but I had the feeling that he was still sitting there calm, quiet, watching everything unfold as if he knew it all. I think, if he had anything to say, it would probably just be, "Sometimes you don't need to speak up for the world to listen. You just need to be quiet enough for others to hear your own conscience." The room remained silent after Sophia Green spoke. No one dared to move. The slow, creaking sound of the ceiling fan seemed to lengthen the silence. Lily was still sitting there, her hands covering her face, her hair falling down almost completely over her eyes. Evan stood behind her, his eyes filled with sympathy and admiration. But Sophia hadn't left. She was still standing in the middle of the cafe, turning to look at each person, her gaze no longer cold but gentle, like afternoon sunlight through dusty glass. "Willow Diner," she began, her voice small, but each word clear as if etched into the air, was built with a single philosophy: everyone who walks through these doors deserves respect. A spoon fell softly on the table. No one picked it up. People just looked at her, as if hearing something very old and very new at the same time. She walked slowly around the cafe, her fingers brushing the old wooden tables and chairs, the worn menus. "I grew up in this town," she continued. "My dad used to take me here every weekend when I was little. He said, 'Look around. There are no rich or poor, black or white. There are just people and their stories.'" Sophia paused, her eyes falling to an empty table. But today, I walked in and found that was no longer true. No response, only lowered eyes. A few guests clasped their hands, as if to hide the regret rising in them. Jenkins nodded slightly, his lips moving as if to say something, then stopped. Sophia turned to Lily. "You know, Lily," she said, her voice low, "when you ignore a person because of their skin color or age, you don't just insult them. You also deny yourself." Lily looked up, tears streaming down her face. "I know. I was wrong," she said breathlessly. "I forgot." Sophia nodded slightly, her eyes shining with sympathy. "No, I didn't forget. I just chose not to. Sometimes, the scariest thing isn't hatred. It's being too busy to see that others need to be treated fairly." Evan looked over, and something in his eyes changed. He understood. This wasn't just a lesson for Lily. It was for him, for everyone who had ever chosen to stay silent when things went wrong. Sophia turned to the middle of the bar. Everyone here this morning saw it. Everyone knew something was wrong, but no one said anything. Do you know why no one answered? After a while, the middle-aged woman who was with her son said softly, "Because we are afraid of trouble." Sophia nodded slightly. "Yes, but keeping silent about wrongs does not keep us from trouble. It only makes the wrong stronger and our courage weaker." The remark was a small but deep cut. No one could refute it. No one wanted to refute it. She returned to the old table where Mr. Harold Green had sat. The empty chair was still there, the sunlight shining on the armrest, as if the man were still sitting there, smiling quietly. "My father," Sophia said, her voice soft, "taught me that respect is not something someone deserves. It is something we choose to give because we understand the value of people." She rested her hands on the back of her chair and continued. "Willow Diner doesn't exist to serve food. It exists to serve kindness. And if that disappears, then even the best food becomes tasteless." That sentence made the whole restaurant fall silent once again, but this time it was no longer a silence of fear, but a silence of awareness. People did not dare to look each other in the eye, not because of shame, but because they were afraid of seeing their own image, when they had turned their backs, had been silent, had overlooked the small but correct things. Lily said softly, her voice trembling Miss Green, "I don't deserve to work here anymore." Sophia looked at her and shook her head. "No. If you leave, this lesson will be meaningless. I need you to stay so that every morning, when you open the door, you will remember this day." Lily looked up, her eyes filled with tears, and nodded slightly. Jenkins took a step forward, his voice hoarse. "Miss Green, thank you. I have lived over 60 years, and this morning I thought I would just come in for coffee as usual. But perhaps I've just learned to be human again." Sophia smiled slightly. "No one is born perfect, Mr. Jenkins. But when we recognize our mistakes, that is when we start to improve." Outside, the sun was soft. Maple leaves were rolling gently across the window. Evan lifted the close sign from the window and turned to look at Sophia. "Do you want me to clear this table?" he asked, pointing to Mr. Harold's place. Sophia looked at the chair and smiled slightly. "No, leave it as it is. It reminds us that respect is not just a gesture. It is a memory to be kept." I left the Willow Diner that afternoon, feeling like the little place had been cleansed. The smell of coffee was still in the air, but there was something else warmer, more real. The small sign in the window reflected the light, and I could clearly read the newly re-engraved words Willow Diner, a place where everyone matters. I think, perhaps from that day on, that restaurant served more than just breakfast. It served the belief that respect can save the small world around us. Inside Willow Diner, the air seemed to pause between breaths. The afternoon sunlight slanted through the windows, cast in golden streaks across the floor where the wooden chairs were still warm with human breath. The scent of coffee and pastries wafted in the air. The scents that had once been symbols of peace now became the backdrop for a thoughtful silence. Sophia Green stood there, in the middle of the bar, not raising her voice, not giving orders, just looking around, as if her eyes could see into every corner of the souls of those sitting with their heads bowed. "There's one thing," she said, her voice calm, but each word ringing out clearly. "I still don't understand." She stopped, turned slightly, her gaze sweeping over each face, the middle-aged man with glasses, the blonde girl, the elderly couple, and even the waiter clutching his towel. "Why," she continued, "didn't anyone speak up?" The question was soft, but its weight froze the room. Some avoided her gaze, bowing lower. Some took deep breaths, trying to exhale as if to ward off the guilt. The man sitting in the corner, Mr. Jenkins, who read the newspaper every morning as a ritual, put down his coffee cup, trembling slightly. He raised his head and spoke slowly, in the hoarse voice of a man who had lived longer than most of the others in the room. "Miss Green, I don't want to get into trouble." Sophia was silent. Her gaze was not harsh, but it made no one dare say anything more. A breath passed. Then she stepped closer, stopping in front of Mr. Jenkins. "Trouble," she repeated. "What do you think is causing the trouble?" Sir Jenkins was silent. He looked down at the table. His eyes fell on the coffee stain in his cup, and he seemed to see himself in it small, trembling, indistinct. "I don't blame you," Sophia said, her voice softening, "because I know, sometimes, silence is the way we choose to live peacefully. But you know." She looked up, looked around, her voice low, heavy as the wind before a storm. "Silence is complicity." No one responded. Only the ticking of the wall clock continued, as if measuring each second of the slowly spreading awareness. She walked slowly toward the middle of the bar. "Silence in the face of wrong does not make us any more innocent," she said. "It only gives the wrong more room to live." I saw Lily hiccup. She lowered her head, tears falling onto the crumpled white handkerchief. Evan stood beside her, holding her hand tightly, because he understood I too had been silent, out of fear, out of respect, because I believed that others would speak for me, but no one said anything. Sophia turned to them. "You're not bad people," she said, "just good people, who chose to be silent at the wrong time." A woman sitting at table 6 raised her hand to her mouth, as if to say something, but stopped. Her young son tugged on her sleeve and asked softly, "Mom, what did they do wrong?" The woman looked down, her eyes red. "They didn't do anything, son." That answer made Sophia nod slightly. "Yes," she said, her voice as low as a prayer. "Sometimes the sin is not in the action, but in the inaction." She stopped and looked out the window. Outside, the sun was setting on the row of houses across the street, the light falling on the wooden sign hanging above the door, Willow Diner. a place where everyone matters. The sign, for a moment, seemed to reflect what she had just said. Willow Diner, Sophia continued, was once a place where people felt safe. I want it to stay that way, but if we let silence fill the place, that safety will be an illusion. She turned around and looked at each of them. I want you to remember, respect is not just bowing down when someone is stronger than you. True respect is standing up when the weak are abandoned. That brought tears to a few of their eyes. Jenkins squeezed the edge of the table, then nodded. You're right, he admitted. We've let ourselves get smaller. Sophia smiled slightly. No one is born brave, Mr. Jenkins, but anyone can learn to be braver. Inside the shop, the late afternoon sun was fading. A breeze blew in through the half-open window, carrying with it the smell of damp earth and the faint sound of a distant car horn. No one said anything more, but there was no need. I could feel it, in their eyes. Something had changed. Not fear, not shame, but awakening. Sophia walked slowly toward the counter, where Lily still sat, her hands clasped together. Tomorrow, she said softly, let the guests feel the difference. Lily nodded, her eyes still wet. I will. Sophia placed a hand on her shoulder, her gaze no longer that of a shopkeeper, but that of someone who had forgiven and believed that people could change. Before leaving, Sophia turned back. She looked around the room once more, then spoke, her voice low and slow, each word imprinted on the wood, the walls, and the memories of those sitting there. Justice is not just in the law, it is in those moments when we dare to open our mouths, even if it is just to say one simple thing. This is not right. She smiled slightly, and when someone is brave enough to say that, the world, even in a small place like Willow Diner, becomes a little better. She turned and opened the door. The afternoon light poured in, hitting the floor, drawing her silhouette long, still, and glowing at the end of the room. The doorbell rang again, but this time the sound was not cold. It was like a promise that from now on each ringing would be the beat of conscience, awakening those who still chose to remain silent. I remained seated at the end table, watching her go. A part of me, and probably everyone else there, knew today. Willow Diner sells more than coffee and baked goods. It sells something else that is lacking in society, the courage to no longer be silent. As the doorbell rang, Sophia Green stood still in the middle of the room, clutching her handbag lightly, looking out into the fading afternoon light. No one in the cafe dared to speak. Everyone just sat there, half wanting to say something, half not knowing what to say. Then, the door behind her opened. A familiar figure entered, Mr. Harold Green. He walked slowly, slightly stooped, his dark suit still neat. The light from the porch cast a soft halo over his silver hair. No one knew when he had returned, only that he had heard everything. Sophia turned around, slightly surprised. "Dad," she called softly. He looked at her, his eyes gentle, smiling strangely calmly. He stepped closer and placed his hand on her shoulder. The gesture was slight, but it was enough for the whole room to understand this father did not need anger to be authoritative. "Okay, son," he said slowly, his voice low and warm. "They understand." Those 4 words seemed to suck all the air out of the room and fill it with something else, peace. Sophia looked at her father, her eyes a mixture of emotion and restraint. She understood. He was not speaking to defend anyone, but to teach her how to end things properly. I remember then, someone in the bar took a deep breath, a long breath, as if relieved of a burden. Mr. Harold turned to Lily Carson. The young waitress was standing, trembling behind the counter, her face flushed, her hands still clutching the white napkin so tightly that her fingers were pale. His eyes stopped on her, not judging, not cold. It was the look of a father looking at a child who had just made a mistake and was regretting it. "Girl," he said softly, "have you learned anything today?" Lily choked, her shoulders shaking. "Yes, I have learned, sir, that respect does not depend on one's position or appearance, and that silence can be more cruel than insults." Her voice broke into a sob. "I'm sorry, Mr. Green. I'm sorry, Miss Sophia. I have no excuse. I just want a chance to make it right." Sophia looked at her silently for a moment. She didn't speak right away. The look made the entire bar hold its breath. Part of her wanted to forgive, but another part knew that forgiveness without boundaries only made mistakes easier to forgive. Finally, she spoke. "Miss Carson," Sophia said slowly, "everyone makes mistakes. What makes the difference is how we act after we realize it." She stepped closer, her voice firm but not stiff. "I will give you a chance to make it right, but only one more time. If you let anyone else be treated like you were today, you will no longer have a place in the Willow Diner." Lily raised her head, tears streaming down her face, but this time, her face had a different light, the light of someone who had decided to do it again. "Thank you, Ms. Green. I promise it won't happen again." Sophia nodded. "Don't promise me. Promise yourself." "Oh, Mr." Harold smiled slightly, then turned to the group. His voice was low, slow, and clear, the voice of someone who had lived long enough to know that change need not be loud. "You know," he said, "I used to think justice had to be won by loud words, by arguments, or by laws. But today, I see that just a sincere apology can make people feel better." No one said anything, but many nodded. The words penetrated each person like a small fire, not blazing, just smoldering and warm. Sophia walked over to her father and gently took his hand. "I can't let them forget this, Dad," she said softly, so only they could hear. "You know," he replied, "but forgiveness doesn't mean forgetting. It means believing that others can do better." She looked at him, and in her eyes, I saw a love that transcended the boundary between father and daughter. It was the respect between two generations, between two ways of looking at the world. Outside, the sky was beginning to turn a pale purple. The setting sun shone in, making the restaurant seem warmer and quieter. The customers sitting around began to clear away, and a few stood up and slowly walked up to Mr. Harold, shaking his hand, saying the words they had never had the courage to say before. "Mr. Green, we apologize. Thank you for teaching us a lesson worth more than any rule." He just smiled, lightly as the wind. "There's nothing to thank me for. I was just sitting here drinking coffee." That made a few people laugh small, but real. Laughs that broke the remaining heaviness. Sophia looked around, her first smile of the day on her lips. "Open 15 minutes early tomorrow," she said to Evan. To prepare for the guests, Evan asked, "No, she replied, "to make coffee for my dad." The whole bar burst into laughter, but it was a warm laugh, like the beginning of a new chapter. I sat there until the lights in the cafe turned a soft yellow. I saw Lily wipe the table, carefully, slowly, as if afraid of missing a speck of dust. Not because she was afraid of being fired, but because she was making amends with her actions. Mr. Harold was still sitting at the same table. The coffee cup before him was cold, but he did not touch it. He just looked at Sophia, the girl who was grown, strong, but still learned the lesson he had lived his whole life to understand that forgiveness does not weaken us. It sets us free. As I stepped out, the small sign outside the door swayed gently in the night breeze. Under the words, "A place where everyone matters," someone, Sophia, perhaps, had added in small handwriting, "Respect can heal. Forgiveness keeps it alive." I stopped, read it again, and thought, perhaps no one needs to say anything more. The afternoon passed slowly at Willow Diner. No tension, no wary glances, just the soft clink of dishes, the stirring of coffee spoons, and the smell of freshly baked goods wafting through the air. But no one left immediately. They stayed not because they hadn't finished their meal, but because there was something in their hearts that hadn't been said. I still sat in my usual corner, observing like a silent witness. Without many words, I could feel it the atmosphere in the shop had changed. It was like after a rain the ground was still damp, the sky was not yet bright, but there was something fresher, more real. In the middle of the shop, Mr. Harold Green sat at the same table, his hands clasped, his eyes on Sophia and Lily, who were chatting in low voices near the cash register. He said nothing, only smiled the smile of a man of experience, who knows when to keep quiet so others can learn to speak. Suddenly, there was a slight creaking of a chair. A middle-aged woman stood up from the table next to her. She was wearing a beige sweater, her dark blonde hair was tied up in a bun, and she was still holding a cup of coffee in her hand, as if to save her courage. She moved closer to Mr. Harold, her eyes no longer avoiding him as before. "Mr. Green," her voice trembled slightly, I want to apologize." Mr. Harold looked up, still silent. She continued, each word slipping through her embarrassment and regret. "This morning, I saw everything. I saw Lily passing you, saw everyone looking but no one saying anything, and I did the same. I turned away." She paused, took a deep breath, not because I agreed, but because I was afraid of attracting attention, afraid of being misunderstood, afraid of being the troublemaker. But when I saw your daughter walk in, I realized what was worse than my fear was my silence. The whole bar fell silent. Everyone looked at her, no longer with judgment, but with sympathy, because in her words, everyone saw a part of themselves. Mr. Harold placed his hands lightly on the table and nodded slowly. "Thank you," he said, his voice so soft that only those sitting nearby could hear it. "Admitting mistakes is the first step to change." She bit her lip and nodded, tears rolling down her cheeks. "You are very kind, Mr. Green," she said, and returned to her seat, but with a somewhat lighter gait. "Do and I." The moment seemed to spark something. From the table behind him, Mr. Jenkins, the man reading the newspaper, gently put down his paper. "I should say this too," he said, his voice low but firm. "I saw what happened. I'm the oldest person here. I should have said something, but I just sat there, like it didn't concern me." He paused, looked around, and sighed. It wasn't until Sophia asked, "Why isn't anyone speaking up?" that I realized that was the question for me. A soft applause came from the corner of the shop. Not the dramatic applause from a movie, but a small, real sound coming from the heart. Lily stood behind the counter, listening to every word, her eyes red. She was not the only one who had made mistakes. Now she felt she was not alone in her journey to make things right. Sophia stood beside him, arms crossed, her gaze deep but gentle. She did not interfere. She let them realize the value of an apology, of honesty. Another customer, who had been looking down at his phone all morning, suddenly spoke up. "To be honest, I used to think these things were no big deal. Everyone has the right to choose who they serve. I used to think, but seeing Mr. Green sitting there, calm, not saying a word of protest, I felt ashamed. Turns out, sometimes the strongest people are the ones who don't need to raise their voices." Mr. Harold inclined his head slightly, his eyes shining calmly. "No one is born knowing everything," he said. "But when you dare to look at yourself, you're halfway to the right thing." The words spread through the room like warm smoke. No one spoke. A few just sat silently, hands on their chests, as if his words had touched a place they had never dared to touch before. I looked around, and for the first time all morning, Willow Diner seemed alive. Not with the sound of conversation, but with the quiet energy of change. The air, heavy with prejudice and silence, seemed lighter. It was as if the old wooden walls had heard something that takes a lifetime to understand. Respect begins with listening. Forgiveness begins with admitting mistakes. Sophia approached her father and said softly, "I think we did more than teach a lesson today." He smiled gently. "Not us, my daughter. They taught themselves." He stood up, slowly picked up his cane, and turned to look at the bar. "Thank you for staying," he said, "because it means you listened. And when people listen to each other, there is hope." Another round of applause broke out, louder this time, more heartfelt. Sophia bowed slightly, and Lily wiped away her tears, but her smile was genuine. Outside the window, the sun had set, leaving a thin golden glow on the horizon. The figures leaving the cafe walked slowly, not saying much, but I knew they brought something out with them, a small feeling, as if they had been repaired from the inside. I left Willow Diner last. The words, "a place where everyone matters," were still lit by a small light on the glass door. But tonight, it felt like more than just a slogan. It was lived out in the eyes, in the words, in the courage of seemingly ordinary people. Dawn at Willow Diner was never the same, 2 days in a row. But the next morning seemed different than any other. The early morning light was so soft it seemed afraid to wake the peaceful atmosphere inside. The frost still lingered on the glass, reflecting the familiar words, "a place where everyone matters," inside. Lily Carson opened the door 15 minutes early, just as Sophia had instructed. She moved slowly, turning on each light in each area, wiping down each tabletop. Her movements today were no longer routine, but purposeful, meaningful. She no longer saw them as work, but as opportunity, a chance to start over. Outside, an old silver car stopped in front of the shop. Harold Green got out, leaning on his familiar ebony cane, his posture steady despite his slow steps. Beside him was Sophia Green, still in her elegant suit, her face lighter than yesterday. They walked slowly through the waking street. People greeted each other. A few shops were open. Church bells rang in the distance. The world was as normal as any other morning. But for them, something had changed. Not the outside world, but the way they looked at people. When Harold and Sophia entered the shop, Lily was already standing behind the counter. The light from the window illuminated her pale blonde hair, making her blue eyes shine even brighter. She saw Mr. Harold, and her chest heaved a little, but this time it wasn't from fear. "Good morning, Mr. Green," she said, her voice trembling slightly but sincere. "Good morning, Miss Carson," he replied, a smile playing at the corners of his lips. "Like yesterday, please black, with less sugar." Lily nodded and started making the coffee. Her hands were still shaking slightly, but her movements were careful and slow. The scent of coffee wafted through the air, like a familiar scent signaling the start of a new day. Sophia sat down across from her father, her eyes fixed on the street lights. For a moment, no one spoke. There was only the hum of the coffee maker, the clink of glasses, and a quiet peace that enveloped them both. Mr. Harold picked up his coffee cup and inhaled the aroma. "The coffee is better today," he said. Sophia smiled and tilted her head. "Maybe because I drink it with more peace of mind today." He chuckled. "There are so many people out there who don't have that peace. My dear, they are angry, afraid, or cut themselves off from the world, simply because they forget that sometimes a word or a look can make someone feel respected." Sophia rested her chin on her hand, looking at her father with a mixture of admiration and contemplation. "Aren't you angry with them?" she asked. Harold shook his head, his smile softening. "Anger only makes you feel stronger for a moment, but forgiveness sets you truly free." The words did not ring out loudly, but they lingered in the cafe, seeping into every corner like the scent of coffee. I sat there in my usual corner and realized it was his calmness, not his accusations, that made everything that happened yesterday meaningful. Lily brought the coffee to the table and set it down gently. She didn't dare look directly at Harold, but when he whispered, "Thank you, Lily," she looked up. His eyes were kind, without any trace of the old days, and for the first time since working at the Willow Diner, she smiled, really smiled. "Thank you for giving me the chance," she said softly. "No, girl," Harold replied. "You gave yourself the chance." Sophia watched the scene, then let out a quiet breath, as if a weight had been lifted. She knew her father had taught Lily, and her as well, that justice did not necessarily come with punishment. It could come from understanding, from compassion, from seeing others with human eyes. She chuckled and said, "Sometimes it takes a moment like that to remind people of what is right. Mr. Harold put down his coffee cup and tilted his head to look at her, the light catching the wrinkles on his forehead, the wrinkles of a lifetime of experience and love. "Who did you learn that from?" he asked, his voice a little teasing. Sophia looked at her father, her eyes filled with love and pride. "I learned that from you." Outside, the morning light shone on two people, a calm father and a strong daughter, sitting side by side like two generations of the same faith. Inside, soft laughter, the clink of dishes, and warm greetings rang out. No more hiding, no more complicit silence. Willow Diner was back to its true self, a place where everyone who entered was seen for who they truly were. As they got up to leave, Lily walked them to the door. "Good day, Mr. Green. Thank you, Miss Carson. You too." The door opened, a bell rang softly, and warm sunlight poured in. Harold squinted at the clear sky, then said slowly, as if talking to himself, "Sometimes it only takes a morning like this to remind me that the world can still be good, if people just stop and think." Sophia linked arms with her father, smiling, and if anyone ever forgets it, she said softly, "I will tell this story." Father and son walked through the light, their shadows stretching down the small street, blending in with the crowd rushing to start their day. Behind them, the doorbell of the Willow Diner still rang a familiar sound, but today it sounded like a promise that, from now on, everyone in that restaurant will always remember one thing: respect does not make us lose anything, but silence in the face of injustice makes us lose ourselves. I sat in the cafe, looking at my half-finished cup of coffee. The light shone on the table, reflecting two faint words that I suddenly remembered: a place where everyone matters. I thought, perhaps today, that saying was more than just a slogan. It had become true. A simple truth, like the warm coffee aroma spreading every morning. Thank you for accompanying us to the end of today's story. Each episode, each story on this channel is not only a moral story, but also a mirror reflecting the way people treat each other in seemingly small moments of everyday life. If you feel something in the story Willow Diner touches your heart, a little reflection, a little awakening, or simply a belief that goodness still exists, please give this video a like to support our creative spirit. Don't forget to share the video with your friends and relatives, because who knows, just a small story today can help someone see life in a different light. And if you want to continue watching stories about personality, awareness, justice, and kindness, please subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss the next episodes we are preparing. Thank you for taking the time to listen, and, most of all, for believing in good things. See you in the next story.